So I was offered something that at first I actually refused because I didn't want it, because maybe it was going to be a little bit too small. But then we accepted it, and then it sat on the allotment for several weeks, getting pushed about in the storm. Now, I sat there and I thought I didn't want something, again, so small, because it is really difficult to manage. So I had a bit of a brainwave. I thought that maybe I could adjust it to fit better in my space and give me a much bigger area. Now, I've been busy down here the last couple of days trying to clear some of the mess, and I really have created more mess, but hopefully by the end of next week it will be sorted. But early last week, when we had a couple of dry days, I started to set my plan in motion. I'll show you what my idea was. We were given another greenhouse, slightly bigger than the one we had previously, where I had grown my Cape gooseberries, but it is all made out of the plastic panelling. Now, this stuff is not very rigid, and a lot of it has really degraded, but for now it will do until I can get some glass panes, especially for the roof. So I had this idea to actually attach my small greenhouse, which I had my Cape gooseberries in this year, and this new greenhouse. Well, new to us. Obviously, it's been used before. Now, this was where my old little greenhouse that I used for growing used to be. And as you can see, all this soil is still here. I've left some of the Cape gooseberries in, but last night was actually the first night that we've had quite a hard frost. And I've woke up to ice in a few places this morning on our allotment. Now, this greenhouse had been in here for quite a while, and the metal actually had been buried into the ground. Now, as you can imagine, those nuts and bolts were really corroded, and it took me best part of the day to try and remove it all without damaging it too much, so I can reuse. Now, this greenhouse, yes, it had its uses, but I found it just too small. It was too low. Even I, at 5'3", felt uncomfortable in there. It wasn't enough really growing space, and it was driving me a bit nuts in there. So I thought I could reuse it. So this is the one that we had, and this is the one that I removed. Now, I did all this on my own. My husband is just not available at the moment to help me. And to be honest, I didn't know whether this was going to work. I've not seen people adding on greenhouses to each other. Now, the first thing I had to do is to make sure that the width of both of these greenhouses and the height was the same. If you don't, it can cause all sorts of issues, but thankfully these were exactly the same size and height. This one in general has most of its glass still available, but unfortunately over the last couple of years there is several panes that has been smashed. So I will be replacing as much as I can, bearing in mind that glass panes are not exactly the cheapest thing to do. I think the best bet is to go into a local glazier or find someone local who is getting rid of the greenhouse glass, hopefully being the same size as what I actually need. So by the time I'd actually taken this one apart and tried to carry the frame minus the glass over the allotment and over an awful lot of obstacles because I hadn't cleared my path and got it down, I put it down on its original foundings at the bottom, these metal risers. Now, normally I would like to use something a little bit more substantial, but if it's been sat there for so long, I'm hoping it's still going to carry on working. Now, before it was buried into the ground, but I want a little bit more height, which means I am going to have to secure this a lot more into the ground itself. Now, once I got this one here and I managed to move this other one, again, I took all the panels out and I carried the frame. They actually matched up really quite well. Now, these are the two bits of overhangs just here, and I was able to line them up. And luckily the one actually overlaps the other slightly, so I was able to drill through the aluminium and put new bolts in. This now is attached to each other through the actual main frame. I've also done it down the sides, tops on both sides, and obviously down the other side too. Now this is tight together, and to be honest, what holds a greenhouse together normally, this is probably a tighter form. Now I was lucky that I actually managed to get this to fit the way it did. I think if there was any obviously changes or anything too much, it probably wouldn't have fitted together. But I think even if I could only fit it so these bits were actually side by side butted up to each other, I think I probably would have used some metal plating across, drilled the holes through and bolted them together that way. But luckily I was able to save that cost and actually just use the bolts straight through both pieces. Now where this is actually on part of an old bed that we had for, well, it's one of the beds that we used for this year, but it was the best place for us to put it here on our allotment, and I think it suits the space really quite well. Now this is compost on this bed, but you can see it's quite weedy, but I will be making a path here because when I actually put these together, I actually have greenhouse doors on either side, which I'm hoping is really going to help us through the growing season. Now there is still quite a lot I've got to do. I've got to fix certain holes. I've got certain panes of glass that I've put in that is far too small for the actual size that I need, but it will keep some of the rain out. I want the rain out because I have wood in here, scraps of old pallet that we used last year, to dry out. I need to use that for some ideas that I've actually got here for our new greenhouse. Now you can probably see this big lump of metal on the floor. There was just one bolt out of all the bolts I had to undo and put together when I did this that I could not get undone. It is seized. So I'll be bringing my hacksaw down to take that off, trying to keep it as small an edge as possible so it doesn't do any damage to anybody. I can always bend over the ends. Aluminium is quite easy to manipulate. And then I can get rid of this last junk. I've also removed the two parts of the base as well. So we had a base layer down this side and obviously on the other side, because this is two separate bases. But it was the same stuff, so I've managed to bolt them together at the bottom to make a much larger base. Now I will be adding a couple of more struts. It is not going to move. There is not much flexibility on this, but I really don't like those metal bases. I just think they just are quite flimsy. Now I know a lot of people do bury them into the ground, but I need a little bit more height in here, so I am going to strengthen those bottom bits up. Now I've started adding some spikes into the outside and bolted through to hold it onto the ground, meaning that it can't move. But I've done several down the outside. Now I want to do a few on the inside, just for that extra bit of precaution. We do get quite a lot of wind here, and to be honest, I'm not expecting at least the plastic sheets to still be here by the time the spring is here next year. But we shall see. I don't want to silicone them in because if you mess up on that silicone, it's so hard to remove. And I've already got one panel, I think it's this one, that has loads of old silicone on it. That is actually causing me a lot of issues to try and get the glass in, which means more time for me to have to cut it and to remove it. So there is a few more jobs I'm missing from my original greenhouse. There's some glass here and here that was broken this year at some point. But I've managed to get the doors, both of them on and on their runners without too much of an issue. But I think this is going to be a really good growing space. Now I've got these here that were here for ages, but they have really rusted on. But I'm going to try and take those off over the next couple of days because these are lethal. I keep scratching my face on it, knocking my head as and when I'm building. And to be honest, all this here is going to change anyway. So what am I going to do with my much bigger, longer greenhouse? Well, simply put, this is going to be for my chilies for next year. That is why I wanted a little bit of extra height. Now, I'm not going to be growing in the ground here in our little greenhouse. Well, not for next season at least. I'm going to be building here some benches, probably about this high, and it will hopefully be on both sides. That will be for my chilies. I found this year in our polytunnel, even though the chilies did really well, but any pots I had on the floor was just getting damaged whenever I took the hose pipe in there to take water in. And next year, I don't want that hassle. I want things to be as simple and easy as I possibly can, but also for as little money as I possibly can. So this is where some of this old pallet wood is going to come in useful. Now, I have got to remove a load of the nails that have probably been left in here, but these are going to be for my legs. Whether I double them up to make extra thickness, it's going to save me a lot of money in wood by using some of this stuff. I want something that's wide enough, at least this side, but I still want to be able to get in easy. But with these pots that hopefully I'll be growing with my chilies in next year, off the ground, I'm not going to damage them with any hose. I'm also going to change my watering system as well. Well, when I say my watering system, me coming down and watering as and when. I'm going to come up with a design that I can do where if I can't get down for a day or two, I know that these chilies and maybe some peppers in here are going to get watered. Now, I'm going to be growing quite a few, but I think I am going to leave a little bit of gap and maybe start the table part way down, because I want a little bit of space for pots, larger pots, to go on the floor, because I'm really hoping to grow some monster chili plants next year, to give it a go and see if I can grow some really big bushy chili plants. Now, I'm not massively experienced in the world of chilies, and I've grown them on and off for years, but nothing ever serious, maybe doing a few plants at a time. This year I'd actually done an awful lot more, and I want to invest some more time into my chili plants because I find them very, very versatile. So that's why I'm probably going to dedicate pretty much all of this new greenhouse to chili plants for next year. Now, will this be storm strength? Well, who knows what greenhouse really is. We haven't lost any greenhouses over the last few years that we've been on this allotment, but you never know, and I want to make it as structurally sound as possible. I don't think there's any chance of these two separating, but it is much bigger now. So I want to make sure that these stakes that I put into ground and then bolt through the bottom frame is going to hold it down in any windy conditions, because the last thing I want is for it to twist and buckle. So I'm not saying that this is the best idea ever and it's always going to work, because I don't know. This is the first time I've done it. I did it on my own. Manoeuvring and moving and trying to level as much as possible was a little bit of a pain in the backside. And I am on a slope, and I have followed that slope with the greenhouse. I have not dug out to make anything level, so this greenhouse is like that, following on top of the soil. Now, whether that's right or wrong, it's probably wrong, but I was not going to dig out this area to this extent, since we're on such a steep bit here, to actually fit this greenhouse in and follow it along. At the moment it is all level, because I know that because of how the frames are actually sitting in, there's no extra pressure on either ends, so I know that hopefully, fingers crossed, that this will be absolutely fine. But I want to use my allotment where I'm not actually spending tons and tons of money. If you have got the money and you want to spend on your allotment, there is nothing wrong with that whatsoever. That is your choice. It's your space, your choice. But for me, I want to cut costs down, and really, we don't really spend that much on our allotment. Yes, we bought the polythene for our polytunnel, but that's a long-term usage. But apart from certain seeds and certain things like that, we are really cutting back on our costs, our allotment. Now our composting is going full steam ahead, and I've got one bay ready to start working on my polytunnel, because that does need a little bit of work, again, once I've cleared everything out. But I want to cut down the cost as much as possible, even if that's collecting as much of my own seed as I possibly can. So for me to use 2 greenhouses that didn't cost us anything, put them together with a few bolts that cost me a few pound, and it saved me an awful lot of money to get a greenhouse of this size. So maybe that's something that you can think about. Sometimes you have to think outside the box and see what you can create or what you can make. Because sometimes one man's rubbish is another man's gains. Now, we were incredibly lucky to get this greenhouse for free, and this other greenhouse that we've got in the end was here when we took on the plot. I think this is the best of both worlds. It means that we're not ending up with loads of buildings on our site that are not suitable because of their size, and we're making the best space that we possibly can to carry on growing for the next growing season. Now, I'm not going to be getting rid of my little potting greenhouse. That will be for all my seedlings still. That is staying there. And next year for my polytunnel, I have got some nice ideas brewing for what I would like to grow there next year. But for this one, this will be for my chilies. I think I should be able to give them the space and the height, and if I can work out a really good watering system where I don't have to use any kind of electricity or power in that way, I think it might work out quite well. So guys, what's the most ingenious things that you have created on your allotment using another man's rubbish? Have you managed to acquire some unusual things and to use them to your advantage? If you've seen our other videos, we've made great use out of pallets, and we've already made 2 polytunnels and a chicken run using recycled pallets. There is lots of things that you can use on your allotment, and there's lots of ways of finding scrap pieces of wood and utilising your space without it making it look like a junkyard, because that's the problem that you can have. We spent last year with an area that was full of stuff that we were saving to use. But remember guys, it doesn't look good. Yes, save those pieces up, but make sure that you are going to use them. I'm a little bit of a collector. I like to keep all sorts of stuff, and if I take anything apart, like using bolts or anything like that, I will always keep them to reuse. It's a great way to be a bit more eco-friendly. So I'm really curious, what have you guys done with recycled materials? Have you ever put 2 greenhouses together? Do you think it's going to work long term, or do you think it's going to be a massive mistake? Either way, let me know in those comments. I really would love some new ideas of creating some great areas here on our allotment. And maybe over the next couple of weeks, I'll be showing you what I'm going to be coming up with for my benches, because I want to use as much free material as I possibly can to make these benches. Don't really want to spend much money. Obviously, after I finish clearing a lot more of my beds and my polytunnel, that really does need to get done, because I've got to get a move on to get my compost finished and turned, so I can create some more new no-dig beds here on our allotment. So thanks for watching guys, and if you're interested in this little project and interested to see whether this is actually going to last, why don't you like and subscribe? This will keep you up to date with any future videos that I'll be doing here on our allotment.